All right, so ready to dive into something pretty interesting.
Always up for a good deep dive. Where are we headed today?
You know, into the world of sport, but not in the way you might think.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Not just scores and highlights, then.
Definitely not. We're going deeper, way deeper, into the philosophy of sport.
Philosophy of sport.
Yeah, it sounds a bit unusual, right? But trust me, it gets really fascinating.
All right, color me curious. What sparked this particular deep dive?
Well, you, the learner, sent in some materials. Really thought-provoking stuff.
Oh, yeah, I remember those. They hinted at some pretty big questions about sport.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to unpack.
So we're not just analyzing game strategies or debating the greatest of all time.
Not this time. We're talking about the ideas, the values, the whole meaning behind sport.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going, but before we get too deep, should we lay out some groundwork?
Absolutely. Our main guide for this exploration is going to be the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on the philosophy of sport.
Ah, the Stanford Encyclopedia. That's a pretty reliable source.
Definitely. It gives us a really solid overview of like all the key areas philosophers have tackled when it comes to sport.
So it's kind of like our philosophical playbook for this deep dive.
Perfect analogy. And for you, the learner, our goal is to give you a whole new appreciation for sport.
Not just as, physical activity, but as something much bigger.
Right. Sport as a cultural phenomenon,
Mhm.
reflecting our ethics, values, even our ideas about what it means to excel.
It's like looking at a familiar painting, but suddenly noticing all these hidden details and brushstrokes you never saw before.
Exactly. We're going to be pointing out those aha sparks you already know and love.
And maybe even challenge some of your assumptions along the way.
For sure. Now, here's a thought to really get us started. Philosophers, from ancient guys like Plato and Aristotle to modern thinkers, have always seen sport as deeply connected to human flourishing.
Interesting. You'd think philosophers would be more interested in, books and ideas, not playing fields.
Right. But there's something about sport, something about these games and contests that has captivated deep thinkers for centuries.
What is it about sport that has drawn such profound reflection for so long? That's a question worth pondering.
And ponder we shall. So let's start by traveling back in time, to ancient Greece, in fact.
Ancient Greece, the birthplace of the Olympics, and dot philosophy. I see a connection brewing already.
You got it. Thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, they saw sport as essential for education.
Not just physical training, though, right? They were all about that mind-body connection.
Exactly. They believed that athletic competitions, what they called gymnakoigones, were vital for cultivating excellence.
Gymnakoiagonis, that term rings a bell. Ah, yes. Those athletic competitions we see depicted in ancient Greek art.
The very same. And this pursuit of all-around excellence, they called it arit.
Arete, that striving for the best version of yourself in every aspect of life.
You're getting it. And sport was a key part of that for them. This idea resonated throughout their culture. Sport played a big role in Hellenistic society.
It makes sense. A shared pursuit, pushing limits, celebrating achievement.
And unifying people too, right?
Mhm.
But if we step outside of ancient Greece for a moment.
Broaden our horizons, so to speak.
Exactly. If we look at other ancient cultures, we see some different primary motives for sport emerging.
Oh, like how the ancient Sumerians and Egyptians saw sport mainly as war preparation.
You nailed it. A much more practical, you could even say militaristic, purpose.
Well, back then, survival often depended on physical strength and combat skills. Makes sense they'd focus on that.
And this practical focus continued with the Greeks and Romans too, right?
Yeah, think about those gladiatorial contests in Rome or the chariot races, all spectacle, but with roots in military training.
Even the ancient poet Virgil, in his epic The Aeneid, includes all these contests of speed and strength. And the underlying theme, war preparedness.
It's interesting, though, how different cultures, even in ancient times, could have such contrasting views on what we'd consider sport today.
It really makes you think about what drives our own fascination with it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it wasn't just for war, right? The Mayans, for example, their ball games had huge religious and social significance.
Yeah, fostering community bonds, settling disputes, even honoring the gods.
So sport as a way to connect with something larger than yourself, to find meaning beyond the everyday.
Right. Then as we move into the medieval period, things shift again. But sport doesn't completely vanish.
Not vanish, no. But its role definitely changed. What was it? Sort of more symbolic, less central to daily life.
Exactly. It's interesting, though, even in medieval Christian thought, Sport had a place.
Like when Augustine called the Apostle Paul the athlete of Christ.
That's the one. And Thomas Aquinas, he also emphasized the importance of developing both the physical and the spiritual, kind of echoing Plato and Aristotle.
That enduring idea of the mind and body being interconnected, essential for a fulfilling life.
Exactly. Now, as we move into the early modern period, it seems sport starts to reemerge in a more familiar way.
Yeah, like during the Renaissance when those forward-thinking schoolmasters incorporated sport into their educational programs.
Right. And you wouldn't believe this, but even Protestant thinkers like Martin Luther and John
The
Milton,
guys who were all about serious study and piety, they were into sports too.
they actually advocated for it. They saw it as a valuable way to educate and train young people.
That's a real surprise. I guess they saw the value in developing the whole person, not just the intellect.
And then comes the Enlightenment, with its focus on reason and experience, both physical and mental.
And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, with his emphasis on the natural development of both body and mind.
Bingo. His ideas really shaped how people thought about education, and by extension, the role of sport.
And that influence carried over into the 19th century, especially in Victorian England and Germany, right?
Big time. Sport was seen as this character-building activity, essential for developing discipline, teamwork, all those good virtues.
And that brings us to a really pivotal moment, the birth of the modern Olympic movement.
Led by Baron Pierre de Coubertin. And guess what inspired him?
Those very philosophical ideas about the educational and unifying power of sport, right?
Exactly. Coubertin envisioned the Olympics as a philosophy of life, a way to use sport to promote peace and understanding across nations.
So even the modern Olympics, with all the competition and national pride, have these deep philosophical roots.
It's all connected. Now, fast forward to more recent times. We mentioned earlier that the philosophy of sport, as an official academic field, is relatively new.
Yeah, why is that? You'd think with such a long history of thinking about sport, it would have become a formal discipline sooner.
It's a good question. It seems like the philosophy of play actually came first.
Play, that makes sense. A more fundamental human activity, right?
Right. Johan Huizinga, a Dutch historian, wrote this influential book called Homo Ludens, which translates to man the player.
So he was exploring the importance of play in human culture and development.
Precisely. But as philosophers started digging deeper, they realized that while sport is definitely a form of play, it also has its own unique features.
Like the focus on competition, the highly structured rules, the emphasis on physical skill and achievement.
Exactly. Sport presented these distinct philosophical questions that needed their own dedicated area of study.
Okay, so how did the field of philosophy of sport actually start to take shape? Who were the pioneers?
Well, initially, philosophers were trying to define what this new field was all about. Like, what were its goals? What questions should it be asking?
Laying the foundation, essentially. I guess every new field needs to figure out its own identity.
Right. And there were some key figures who really helped to do that. Paul Weiss, for instance.
Weiss, the philosopher who connected sport to broader philosophical inquiries.
That's the one. He saw the philosophy of sport as a way to examine those fundamental principles that reveal the true nature of sport and its relevance to other areas of philosophy.
So not just about sport for sport's sake, but about what it can teach us about ourselves and the world.
Exactly. And then there was Robert Osterhout.
Osterhout, the founding editor of the Journal of the Philosophy of Sport.
Yes. He stressed the importance of genuinely philosophical inquiry into the very essence of sport. He didn't want it to just be, armchair sports commentary.
It had to be rigorous, intellectually challenging, truly philosophical in its approach.
You got it. And these early efforts really helped to legitimize the field and set the stage for its future development.
So how did the field evolve from there? Did it branch out or specialize?
R. Scott Kretschmar, a prominent philosopher of sport, outlined this helpful framework for understanding how the field progressed. He identified 3 distinct phases.
Okay, I like frameworks. Breaks things down nicely. Tell me more.
The first phase, from the late 19th century into the early 20th century, he called the eclectic phase.
Eclectic, meaning it drew from various sources and approaches.
Exactly. Thinkers like William James, John Dewey, they started highlighting the educational value of play and sport.
Challenging that traditional view of education as solely focused on the intellect.
Exactly. They were pushing back against that mind-body dualism, saying, hey, the physical matters too.
Makes sense. It was around that time that physical education started becoming more prominent in schools.
Right. And then came what Kretschmar called the system-based phase.
So this is where things get more organized, more systematic.
Precisely. Philosophers like Klaus Meyer and Earl Ziegler started applying those established philosophical systems like existentialism and pragmatism to analyze sport.
So taking those big philosophical frameworks and using them to understand the world of sport.
Exactly. And this really helped to develop a more rigorous and philosophically sophisticated way of studying it.
Laying the groundwork for philosophy of sport to be taken seriously as its own distinct discipline.
You got it. And that brings us to the disciplinary phase. This is where things really solidify.
So we're talking about the 1970s, right? When the philosophy of sport became its own official field.
Exactly. The Philosophic Society for the Study of Sport was founded in 1972, later becoming the International Association for the Philosophy of Sport.
Getting organized, forming professional associations, publishing journals, all the hallmarks of a burgeoning academic field.
Exactly. And key works by figures like Paul Weiss, Eleanor Matheny, and Howard Slusher really helped to consolidate the field.
Building up a body of literature, establishing shared questions and methodologies, it's like watching a new scientific field emerge.
Perfect analogy. And just like in science, different schools of thought started to emerge within the philosophy of sport.
Oh, like different perspectives on how to approach the big questions.
Right. One of the early divisions was between what were broadly termed analytic and continental approaches.
Okay, those are some big philosophical labels. Can you break down the difference for us?
Think of it like this. Analytic philosophers were really focused on defining concepts precisely, using logic and language analysis.
So, like trying to pin down exactly what we mean by sport or game or competition.
Exactly. Bernard Suits, Klaus Meyer, Thomas F. McBride, they were all key figures in this camp. They wanted clarity, rigor, and a focus on those fundamental building blocks of sport.
And the continental folks, they took a different approach,
Yeah, they were more influenced by those European philosophical traditions.
like phenomenology, existentialism, those big names.
You got it. Thinkers like R. Scott Kretschmar and Drew Hyland, they were more interested in exploring the lived experiences of athletes.
So, like, what does it actually feel like to be in that moment of intense competition? What does it mean to push your limits?
Precisely. They emphasized interpretation, meaning-making, and the subjective side of sport.
So, two different lenses for understanding the same phenomenon. That makes sense. And where has the field gone more recently?
Well, starting in the 1990s, there was a noticeable shift towards what's often called a hermeneutic or applied philosophy phase.
So, a more practical, maybe even ethical focus.
Exactly. The work of Alasdair MacIntyre, particularly his concept of social practices, had a big impact on this shift.
So, instead of just trying to define sport, philosophers started focusing on how sport actually functions in society.
Right. They started looking at those intrinsic goods and excellences that are unique to each sport.
Like the specific skills, values, and goals that define a particular sport and make it meaningful for those who participate.
And this led to a deeper examination of ethical issues like cheating, doping, violence in sport.
So, a move towards applying those philosophical insights to real-world problems within the world of sport.
Precisely. And of course, those earlier debates about the nature of sport, they haven't gone away.
Yeah, I can imagine the rise of esports and all those new forms of competition have really shaken things up.
Absolutely. Philosophers are still wrestling with that fundamental question.
Hmm.
What is sport? How do we define it in a way that encompasses all these new developments?
And the phenomenological approach is still going strong too, right? With all the new insights from neuroscience and cognitive science about how we acquire skills and how our minds and bodies work together in sport.
You got it. And there's a growing interest in the aesthetics of sport as well, exploring the beauty, grace, and artistry of athletic performance.
So the field is constantly evolving, expanding, asking new questions, incorporating new perspectives. It's a really exciting time for the philosophy of sport.
It really is.
Ugh.
Now, let's dig into one of those foundational questions that has sparked so much debate. What is sport? It's not as straightforward as it might seem.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than just, running, jumping, and throwing a ball.
Exactly. Philosophical theories of sport generally fall into two main categories: descriptive and normative.
Okay, I know those terms from other areas of philosophy. Descriptive theories try to explain what sport actually is, while normative theories tell us what sport should be.
Spot on. And within normative theories, we can further divide them into externalist and internalist perspectives.
All right, let's unpack those. What's the key difference between externalist and internalist views?
Externalist theories basically look outside of sport itself to understand its nature and significance. They see sport as being shaped by those larger social forces.
Oh, like economic structures, political ideologies, cultural norms.
Exactly. They argue that you can't really understand sport without understanding the social context in which it exists.
So sport as a reflection of the broader world, not something separate from it.
Right. And there are different flavors of externalism. William J. Morgan, a prominent figure in this area, identifies several types.
Like commodification theory, right? The idea that sport has become just another product to be bought and sold.
Yes. Commodification theory sees sport primarily through the lens of economic profit, often arguing that this focus on money and entertainment has corrupted the true spirit of sport.
And New Left theory, if I remember correctly, focuses on the historical development of sport and its links to labor relations.
Exactly. Thinkers like Jean-Marie Brome argue that modern sport emerged alongside capitalist society and reflects its power dynamics.
So they see sport as being embedded in those larger historical processes of industrialization and class struggle.
Right. And then there's hegemony theory.
Hegemony theory, that's the one that focuses on how power operates through culture, including sport, right?
Sure. Exactly. Thinkers like Richard Grunow and John Hargreaves argue that sport can both reinforce and challenge existing power structures.
So sport as a site of ideological struggle, where dominant values are both transmitted and contested.
You got it. And one common thread running through these externalist theories is that they tend to see the value of sport as instrumental.
Meaning it's valuable because of what it does or represents in relation to those larger social forces.
Exactly. They often argue that sport, in itself, doesn't have some inherent or unique value. Its worth is tied to its social and political functions.
So a bit of a deflationary account of sport, you could say. Not everyone would agree with that, though, right?
Definitely not. That's where internalist theories come in.
Internalist theories, those are the ones that focus on what's unique and valuable about sport itself, right?
Spot on. They argue that sport has its own internal logic, its own set of values and purposes that make it distinct from other social practices.
So even though it's influenced by the outside world, there's something special, something inherently meaningful about sport itself.
Exactly. And within internalism, there are different schools of thought. We've got formalism, conventionalism, and broad internalism, also known as interpretivism.
Okay, a good old-fashioned philosophical showdown. Let's start with formalism. What's the main idea there?
Formalism, at its core, claims that sport is fundamentally defined by its rules.
Just the rules, nothing else.
Well, the formalists would say that those rules are the key to understanding everything about a particular sport.
So if you want to know what counts as a goal or a foul, you just look at the rule book.
Exactly. And the big name in formalism is Bernard Suits.
Suits, the guy who wrote The Grasshopper, Games, Life, and Utopia.
That's the one. He laid out a really influential formalist framework for understanding games, including sports.
So what are the key components of Suits' framework?
He argues that all games share four essential elements: goals, means, rules, and something called the losery attitude.
Okay, that's a new one. Break those down for me. Let's start with goals.
Suits distinguishes between the goal you're trying to achieve within the game itself.
Like scoring a touchdown in football or hitting a home run in baseball.
Exactly. He calls that the pre-losery goal.
Pre-illusory because it exists before the game starts, in a way.
Right. And then there's the losery goal, which is simply winning the game.
So the illusory goal is the goal that only makes sense within the context of the game itself.
You got it. It's the goal that drives the competition. Now, to achieve these goals, you need means.
Means like the actions you're allowed to take within the game.
Precisely. And here's the key. Those allowed means are always less efficient than the ways you could achieve the same goal outside of the game.
Okay, that's interesting. Give me an example.
Sure. Imagine you're playing basketball. The pre-losery goal is to get the ball through the hoop.
Which you could technically do all day long without playing a game.
Exactly. But in a basketball game, you can't just pick up the ball and run straight to the hoop.
Right, there are all these rules about dribbling, passing, not traveling.
Exactly. Those rules create those unnecessary obstacles that Suits talks about. They define the game.
So the rules are what make it a challenge, what make it fun, what make it a game in the first place.
You got it. And Suits calls those fundamental rules the constitutive rules.
Constitutive because they constitute or create the very essence of the game.
Exactly. And then he distinguishes those from rules of skill,
Rules of skill, those are like strategies or techniques.
Right, like knowing how to shoot a free throw effectively or how to execute a perfect tennis serve.
So those are guidelines for playing well within the boundaries of those constitutive rules.
You nailed it. And finally, we have the illusory attitude.
This is the one I was most curious about. What exactly does it mean to adopt a illusory attitude?
It basically means that you accept the rules of the game, not because you're forced to, but because you want to play.
So it's a kind of willing submission to the artificial constraints of the game.
Exactly. You're choosing to play within those limitations because that's what makes the game possible.
It's like saying, I agree to play by these made-up rules because playing the game is more important to me than just achieving the goal in the easiest way possible.
Exactly. And Suits argues that if you're secretly planning to cheat, to break the rules whenever you can get away with it, then you're not really playing the game.
Even if you never actually break a rule. So it's about an inner commitment to the spirit of the game, not just outward compliance.
Exactly. And from these four elements, goals, means, rules, and illusory attitude, Seuss defines playing a game as the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles.
That's actually a really elegant definition. It captures the essence of what makes a game a game.
Right. And then he extends this to define sport as games of physical skill with a wide and stable following.
So not just any game, but one that involves physical prowess and has a significant number of dedicated fans and participants.
Exactly. He later refined the definition a bit to include judged performances like gymnastics and figure skating.
Makes sense. Those are definitely sports, even though they're not strictly games in the same way that, say, football or tennis are.
Right. But Suits' formalism, influential as it is, has faced its fair share of criticism.
Oh, I can imagine. No philosophical theory is perfect, right? What are some of the main objections to formalism?
Well, critics argue that it's too focused on those written rules and doesn't count for all those unwritten norms and conventions that also shape how sports are played.
Ah, the unwritten rules, like those unspoken codes of conduct and sportsmanship.
Exactly. Think about, like, shaking hands after a tennis match or helping a fallen opponent up in soccer.
Or intentionally kicking the ball out of bounds when someone's injured, even though there's no rule requiring it.
Right. Those are all part of the ethos of the game, but they're not explicitly codified in the rulebook.
So critics say that formalism is too narrow, too rigid in its focus on those formal rules.
Exactly. They argue that it doesn't capture the full complexity of how sport actually works in practice.
And that leads us to conventionalism, right? Which takes those unwritten rules into account.
Exactly. Conventionalism merged as a response to those limitations of formalism.
So what's the key idea behind conventionalism?
Conventionalists argue that those formal rules are important, but they're not the whole story.
There's more to it than just what's written down in black and white.
Precisely. They emphasize those unwritten norms or conventions that also shape how sport is played and understood.
So it's not just about following the letter of the law, but also about understanding the spirit of the game, the accepted ways of doing things.
You got it. And one of the key figures in conventionalist thought is Fred D'Agostino.
D'Agostino, the philosopher who emphasized the ethos of the game.
That's the one. He argued that those unwritten conventions contribute to forming that ethos, those shared understandings that guide how the rules are interpreted and applied.
So it's about the interplay between those formal rules and those informal conventions.
Exactly. And conventionalism helps to explain why the same sport might be played a bit differently in different contexts.
Like how a casual pickup basketball game is different from an NBA Finals game.
Precisely. The rules might be the same, but the way they're applied, the level of intensity, the expectations of sportsmanship, they can all vary.
It's about recognizing that context matters. But conventionalism has faced some criticisms too, right?
It has. One of the main ones is that it can be a bit too accepting of existing practices, even those that might be problematic.
Oh, I see. So if a sport has developed a convention that's unfair or discriminatory, conventionalism might not have the tools to critique it.
That's the worry. It can seem to lack that critical edge to distinguish between good and bad conventions.
Just because something is the way it's always been done doesn't necessarily mean it's right.
Exactly. To address this, some philosophers have proposed the idea of deep conventionalism.
Deep conventionalism. Okay, that sounds intriguing. How does that work?
Deep conventionalists, like William Morgan, argue that we need to distinguish between two levels of conventions.
Okay, two levels, like surface conventions and deep conventions.
You got it. Surface conventions are those more practical, everyday rules of thumb that help to coordinate gameplay.
Like, don't hog the ball, or call your own fouls.
Right. While deep conventions are more fundamental, they reflect those underlying values and purposes that the sport serves.
So they shape the overall culture and meaning of the sport, not just the moment-to-moment actions.
Precisely. Think about the amateur ideal in sport, the idea that you should play for the love of the game, not for money or fame.
Ah, that classic idea of the pure athlete competing for the joy of it.
Exactly. That's a deep convention that shapes how we view things like professionalism, endorsements, and the pursuit of financial gain in sport.
I see. So deep conventionalism argues that we need to look at those deeper values to judge whether those surface-level practices are justifiable.
Precisely. But even deep conventionalism has its critics. It's not always clear how to distinguish between surface and deep conventions.
And it still leaves open the question of how we judge the deep conventions themselves. What makes a deep convention a good one?
Exactly. Lots of philosophical debate to be had there. Now let's move on to the third major category of internalist theories. Broad internalism or interpretivism.
Okay, broad internalism. I'm sensing this one tries to encompass even more than formalism and conventionalism.
You're right on the money. Broad internalism argues that sport is constituted not only by those explicit rules and implicit conventions, but also by a set of underlying principles.
Principles, like those fundamental values and ideals that give the sport meaning and shape how we understand it.
Exactly. Robert L. Simon, one of the key figures in this camp, calls them the presuppositions of sporting practice.
Presuppositions, meaning those underlying assumptions that must be true for the whole thing to make sense.
Exactly. And these principles, like fairness, respect for opponents, the pursuit of excellence, they inform how we interpret and apply those rules and conventions.
So it's like saying those written and unwritten rules are important, but they need to be understood in light of these deeper values.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that sport isn't just a set of arbitrary rules, but a meaningful human practice with its own internal logic.
I like that. And this approach actually reminds me of legal philosophy, specifically the idea of interpretivism.
You're absolutely right. Simon was heavily influenced by legal thinkers like Ronald Dworkin, who argued that legal rules should be interpreted in light of underlying principles of justice.
So broad internalists are kind of saying that sport has its own form of jurisprudence, where those principles guide how we understand the rules and apply them to specific situations.
Exactly. And within broad internalism, there are several distinct approaches, each emphasizing different aspects of those underlying principles.
Okay, let's hear them. Which philosophical rabbit hole are we going down next?
Well, one is called contractualism.
Contractualism, something about agreements and obligations.
Exactly. Contractualists argue that sport is based on this kind of implicit social contract among the participants.
Like by choosing to play, you're agreeing to be bound by those rules and conventions.
Precisely. Warren P. Fraley, a prominent contractualist, argues that those rules don't have moral force just because they exist, but because the players have agreed to be governed by them.
It's like a voluntary agreement to enter into a shared world with its own set of rules and expectations.
Exactly. Think about the Olympic Oath, for example. It's a symbolic representation of that shared commitment to fair play.
Okay, that makes sense. What about that other approach, the one that emphasizes respect for the integrity of the game?
Ah, yes. This perspective, developed by Robert Butcher and Angela Schneider, focuses on the idea that each sport has its own unique set of values and purposes.
So like each sport has its own internal good, something worth striving for that's distinct from just winning or losing.
Precisely. They draw on R. Scott Kretschmar's view of sport as a form of performance comparison, where athletes are essentially testing themselves against each other to see who's best.
And in doing so, they're not just competing for victory, but also trying to achieve those excellences that are specific to that sport.
Exactly. And they argue that everyone involved, players, coaches, officials, even fans, has a duty to respect and uphold that integrity of the game.
So it's about recognizing that the game itself has value, a kind of inherent worth that should be protected and honored.
Exactly. And finally, we have the perspective of mutualism.
Mutualism, the idea that sport is ultimately a cooperative endeavor.
In a way, yes. Mutualists like Robert L. Simon, Cesar R. Torres, and John S. Russell argue that competition in sport is ultimately about a shared quest for excellence.
So it's not just about beating your opponent, but about pushing each other to be better, to achieve those higher levels of skill and performance.
You got it. And John S. Russell has this great example about a baseball umpire.
Oh, yeah, I think I remember this one. Well, it was about an umpire who deviates from the rule book to uphold the spirit of the game.
Exactly. He argues that sometimes to protect the integrity of the game, you might need to go beyond the letter of the law.
So it's not just blind rule following, but a deeper understanding of what the rules are ultimately meant to achieve.
Right. And mutualists emphasize that the value of victory is often secondary to this pursuit of excellence.
It's not just about winning at all costs, but about playing the game well, with respect for your opponents and the spirit of the sport.
Yeah.